Hello, and a very warm welcome to this Asian Development Bank Virtual Business Opportunities Seminar, delivered to you in partnership with the Department for International Trade and British Expertise International. In today's seminar, we will be joined by a panel of ADB experts who will share how to navigate the procurement processes and provide intel on key sectors such as infrastructure, transport, and energy. After introductory remarks, brief presentations on project pipelines in these sectors will be shared, followed by practical insights on doing business with the ADB. We are delighted that Lord Bouffiel's British Ambassador Designate to the Philippines has also joined us to deliver opening remarks. I'm Veronica Lake with the UK-ASEAN Business Council and have a couple of notes to highlight before we begin. Firstly, we would love to hear from you, so please use the question box at the bottom of your screen to type your questions. Our chair will pass them over to the right speaker. Please note that all slides with contact details used on today's seminar, as well as the recording, will be shared after the webinar. And last, if you are on social media, please do tag us. And now, to deliver his opening remarks and today's chair of the session, I would like to hand over to Derek Sanyahumbi, the Chief Executive Officer at the British Expertise International. Derek, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Veronica, and welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. I hope that you'll find this webinar as useful as we have in the past, and it's great once again to have the Department for International Trade, UK-ASEAN Business Council, and ourselves hosting you for this ADB Business Opportunities seminar. And we have got a number of speakers who will be covering key areas of interest, and our program today will start off with some opening remarks from Ambassador Designate to the Philippines, Laura Bouffier. Laura, look forward to hearing from you. And she'll be followed by Phil Rose, who is the Alternative Executive Director for the Asian Development Bank. And then Robin Mckenzie, our Group Marketing Director, will also have a few opening remarks. And then as we go into the meat of the event, we will also hear from Rustam Abdukayumov, who is the Director for Procurement Division 2 at the ADB. And then we will look at the opportunities and project lines along specific sectors that we are focusing on, which include transport and energy. And we'll be joined by ADB specialists in those sectors to take us through those. And then we'll finish off by having a look through navigating the procurement processes, and that will be covered again by ADB by Luke Forchman. And look forward to what should be a very interesting event. And this is the second of our annual ADB events, and it's become very popular on our calendar, and we're delighted to see so many members and also other connections and networks that have joined us. And both the transport and energy sectors provide some great opportunities for UK businesses to pursue in the ASEAN region, and we look forward to hearing where those are. And please feel free to use the chat box to the Q&A to ask questions, and as Veronica said, we'll be able to move those along and make sure that they're answered, and we'll keep going. Also, just to remind you that whilst we are hosting this event, I would ask all the participants to please keep them cameras and mics turned off. We are recording this event, and we're also hosting this event under the Chatham House rule. So I would request that all participants respect that, please. You can use all the information that you get. Slide decks will be shared with you after the event, but it would be great if you would refrain from quoting specific people as you use the material that you receive. And with those opening remarks, I am delighted to to welcome the British Ambassador Designate to the Philippines, Laura Boffies, for her introductory remarks. Laura, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Derek. And good morning or good afternoon, everyone. As we say in the Philippines, magandang umaga or magandang hapon. I'm absolutely delighted to be joining you today for this virtual business opportunities seminar. On the basis of the participation list, which I've seen, I know it's going to be a fantastic event. So let me kick off by saying thank you to our organizers, the ADB, of course, Rustam Abdulkayoumov and his ADB procurement team, Phil Rose, our very own alternate executive director to the ADB, the UK-ASEAN Business Council and Ian Gibbons as its CEO, and Derek, of course, you and your team at the British Expertise International. And I want to thank my colleagues as well across the British government and our Department for International Trade in particular here in Manila for making this event possible. I want to express how grateful I am to all of you for organizing this event and giving us the opportunity to meet virtually. Now, I think I'm stating the obvious when I say to all of you quite how significant and valued the Asian Development Bank is to governments in Asia and the Pacific. It is a modern, innovative, and impactful development bank. Governments in the region have relied on the ADB to finance their projects and help them progress on various development goals. And the ADB has recently demonstrated flexibility and innovation in shaping the region's response to COVID. Furthermore, it's actually done that in a fashion that is green, inclusive, and resilient. But I'm here today to also tell you that the ADB is equally valued by us in the British government as a key partner for the UK in Asia and the Pacific. The UK and the ADB have a long and prosperous relationship, with the UK serving as one of the ADB's founding members. We have a secondee from the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office on the board of the ADB who supports our engagement with the ADB. That is Phil Rose, who you will be hearing from straight after me. As you know, the region is gaining more and more importance for the UK. That is evidenced by our government's integrated review and Indo-Pacific tilt, our determination to be an effective and impactful partner to ASEAN, and our engagement on CPTPP. And we see the ADB as a key partner to support the region in its development in general and recovery from COVID in particular. The sectors of transport and energy in particular have prompted necessary transformational changes as the region recovers from the pandemic. Evolving behaviors and priorities will change the way transport projects are planned, and the ADB is at the forefront of developing new and safer transport modes. The ADB's approach to energy also presents exciting opportunities for the region to build a green and resilient recovery through sustainable solutions and innovations. It continues to reinforce the creation of modern energy frameworks to meet the region's development targets. The UK very much welcomes the ADB's vision on post-COVID-19 transport and energy development. And we believe that facilitating and building partnership with UK expertise will be critical to deliver on this vision. Indeed, UK solutions in transport have pivoted to support infrastructure and provide services which contribute towards low carbon, safe, accessible, and affordable systems. On energy, we are actively working with the ADB as it reviews its energy policy to help the region pave the way for cleaner and climate-friendlier recovery. The UK has world-leading capabilities in areas including offshore wind, smart energy system, sustainable construction, green finance, and zero or low emission vehicles. And we are eager to bring those innovations to the region. We also believe that the ADB provides unique and strategically important exporting opportunities for companies looking to enter or expand into the region. All companies working on ADB-funded contracts are guaranteed payment, assured of transparency, and protected by the ADB's robust procurement framework. You will hear more about this in a little while. But by working with the ADB, companies have the chance to expand their market reach, grow their network, and establish their credentials in the region. Historically, the UK has done well in ADB's commercial procurement, having secured over 8,000 contracts since the bank's founding, cumulatively worth almost $3.5 billion. The UK does particularly well in ADB's consultancy work, where we are rated highly given the quality of our service delivery. But we do not want to rest on our laurels, and nor does the ADB want us to. The ADB is keen to reach out to include more companies. This is where the British government's Department for International Trade is keen to support. Out of the British Embassy in Manila, we have a team dedicated to support UK companies pursuing ADB-funded work. Our team provides timely project information and assistance needed throughout the ADB's procurement process. We organize strategic and commercial activities to help companies understand and engage with the ADB. This support is available to assist all companies, whether new to the ADB or indeed those with more experience. We do take advantage of the fact that our embassy in Manila is just a short drive to the ADB headquarters, and we engage meaningfully with the bank's senior officials and project leads. We look forward to a return to working in Manila in the ADB offices in the year ahead and bringing back our regular trade missions to the bank's procurement and service and sector events. But in the meantime, I do encourage you all to engage with our ADB sector and procurement specialists virtually. They bring valuable information crucial to your exporting prospects. After our sessions this afternoon or this morning, please do reach out to our DIT Manila team, and we will be happy to work with you on your export strategies. Please do enjoy the rest of the session, and we look forward to hearing from all of you. Very many thanks.
Ambassador, thank you very much for that introductory remark. And I think it's great to hear that the enthusiasm in terms of encouraging British companies to pursue more work and opportunities that come through from the ADB, and I hope that this will continue to be an area that you will help us as we drive that ambition to have more and more British companies explore opportunities and deliver work. And I think you certainly highlighted those specific areas in transport and in energy where we are leaders in terms of the innovation and tech that's being developed as we pursue the net zero targets. Thank you very much for that, for those remarks. And with that, I would like to move on to introducing the UK's Executive Director at the Adb, Alternative Executive Director at the Asian Development Bank, to give us his opening remarks. And delighted to welcome Phil Rose. Phil, would love to hear from you.
Well, thanks very much, Derek. It's a pleasure to address this august gathering. I think it's a great pleasure also to follow Law. For those of you who haven't looked into her CV, Law's really well placed to speak about ADB because she has a development background. In fact, we first met in secondary school in Addis Ababa when she was education advisor and I was head of education policy in DFID. So there's no getting away from the fact that the last 18 months have been extremely challenging for everybody in ADB. The office has been closed, as you know. The COVID challenges in the Philippines have been particularly severe. And so we've had to adapt to virtual working. And a lot of additional ADB funding has had to be redirected to deal with the immediate problems raised by COVID. But now is quite a good time to be coming in because now there's increasing focus on the green, inclusive and resilient recovery. We, the UK, have the advantage of being the host of COP. That gives us a huge extra profile. And I think ADB is starting to rebalance its sectoral strategy so that in addition to the traditional infrastructure focal areas of energy and transport and so on, there will be increasing attention to human development, particularly health and education. Health, of course, driven strongly by the pandemic, and education by the fact that so many children have lost out on their schooling over the last 18 months. So I think there'll be a much broader set of opportunities going forward. And in energy and transport particularly, it's interesting times as well. Energy, ADB is hopefully about to sign off a new and much more progressive energy policy, getting away from fossil fuels and moving into much more into greener forms of energy. And transport, we're continuing to support particularly public transport and moving a little bit away, I think, from traditional roads. So I think there are all kinds of excellent opportunities coming up. Hopefully, as Law says, Manila will open up and many of the other borrowing countries will open up and allow us to get back in and have missions, because there's no getting away from the fact that with physical infrastructure projects, it's quite difficult to do anything if you can't actually visit to do feasibility and so on. So I think I'll stop there and hand it back to Derek, and wishing you all a really interesting, informative and productive session today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil, for that introduction. And I think there's certainly a lot there that we as the UK could be doing in terms of working with the ADB, and looking forward to hearing specifics coming through. Next in our lineup is Robin Mckenzie, who's the Book Group Marketing Director for British Expertise International. And Robin.
Thank you very much, Derek. I feel like I'm in the headmaster's office as I talk to our own CEO about British Expertise International. But thank you very much for those introductory remarks from both Law and Phil. And I was very struck as I go through my comments how similar our goals, ambitions, and aims and themes are to those of ADB, which is why it's such a pleasure and a privilege to be partnering on this event. So the focus for British Expertise International is to support British-based businesses in their international growth strategies and execution. And we support businesses of all sizes, from micro SMEs right the way through to global players. Our main focus areas are in the domains of physical and social infrastructure. So as Phil has just mentioned, of course, energy, transport, and the basic infrastructure and the critical infrastructure for a nation is a key area of focus. But we're increasingly seeing both education and health and human development are critical both to the countries we work with, but also to our members, and the ability to grow business through delivering real beneficial services in those areas. To help our members grow and connect, we use really two main tools. The first is events like this, which we either organize ourselves or do in partnership, as we're doing today, with critical partners and critical enablers. The second thing we do is we work with our members in more dedicated working groups. And here we take a real subject matter expertise focus. We try and demonstrate at a depth and scale what the UK and our members' capability is in certain key areas. And it won't surprise you that we have working groups that now focus on the critical themes we've talked about, from education to climate change, critical infrastructure, and the key issue of diversity and inclusion. For our members, we try and deliver four things. The first is we try and ensure that they understand the nature of opportunity that sits ahead of them at a global level, at a regional level, and at a country level. The second thing we try and do is to help connect them to the key stakeholders, the key enablers, the key policymakers, and the key supports that they will need to succeed in international markets. The third thing is we try and amplify their proposition. We amplify their proposition by ensuring that those key stakeholders and enablers are aware of what our members do as individual organizations and what the collective offering is of all of the members we have in key thematic areas. And the final thing we seek to do is to help accelerate their ambition, accelerate their momentum by providing platforms that help them connect with, engage with, and understand how best they can trade internationally and help grow both the UK's position as an export nation, but also support the in-country ambitions and the regional ambitions of the countries that we work with. So that's a very brief introduction to British Expertise International. I'm sure from everything that we've all said, you will all understand how important and how central an event this is, and I very much look forward to the proceedings for the rest of the day. Thank you very much indeed. Back to you, Derek.
Thanks very much, Robin, for that overview. And it's great so far to hear that how aligned the UK is. And I think it's really great to see the strategic imperative being around and making sure that those expertise that the UK brings are able to be used both in the Asian-ASEAN region and globally. And through these type of engagements, we certainly try and make sure that both our members and UK business in general are aware of what those opportunities are, how to engage in those opportunities, and we are always grateful that the Asian Development Bank is always on hand to continue to support us as we try and push and encourage British business to explore those markets. And next on our lineup, we're going to hear from Rustam Abdukayumov. Apologies again for pronouncing the second name, but Rustam is Director, Procurement Division 2, and Rustam has actually been involved in a number of our events, so it's really great to always have him here on board and sharing some of his insights with us. Rustam, over to you.
Thank you so much, Derek, and good morning to our colleagues in the UK. And it's my pleasure to really welcome you to this virtual business opportunity seminar. First of all, I would like to extend my thanks to our colleagues from British Embassy Manila, Department for International Trade, UK-ASEAN Business Council, and British Expertise International for helping us in organizing this event. I know a lot of work is being done on the background, and we are very happy that these events are conducted very smoothly. Also, big thanks to Ambassador Laura Buffel and AED Phil Rose for joining today's session. And I would like to maybe start with the fact that despite of the pandemic, ADB's portfolio is still growing, and we have new types of projects being prepared, and we see quite a lot of diversity in different approaches which we are using in designing projects. So current sovereign operations portfolio is about $100 billion US. It means all the value of all projects which are currently ongoing and which are financed by ADB under government guarantees. And in addition to that, we have about 14 billion of non-sovereign portfolio, which is projects which are not under government guarantees. And these kind of projects are implemented by our private sector operations department. Coming to real opportunities for consultants, I could just share with you that last year we provided more than $200 million for consulting services that are administered by ADB. This means ADB does recruitment of consultants and manages these contracts. And we finance close to 4,000 contracts with individual consultants every given year, and more than 200 contracts with firms. But this is not all. In addition to that, there are many consulting opportunities under loans and grants that are managed by our borrowers. And since our portfolio is growing and more complex projects are being designed, there is increasing needs from the borrowers, not only for goods supply, for civil work contractors, but also for a big range of consulting services. Normally, these opportunities are advertised on ADB website, and large civil work contractors, they often have offices in different countries, and they monitor such opportunities very closely. But for consulting industry, of course, the picture is slightly different because not all consulting firms have offices in ADB member countries, and therefore they may not be fully aware of all the opportunities. So the purpose of today's seminar is to share how to find those opportunities. And I just wanted to highlight that because of increasing complexity of projects, in many countries, borrowers need consulting support not only in traditional areas such as project implementation and monitoring, but in the more technically complex areas such as detailed engineering design, preparation of bidding documents, helping with the bid evaluation, helping with the procurement of large contracts, and also construction supervision. So these are relatively longer term consulting assignments, which can go from 5 to 7 years. And there are many, many opportunities coming up in this area. Then another point I just wanted to highlight is that because of these more complex assignments, what we see is that many consulting firms, even very well-known, very experienced, they join hands with other firms and they create associations when they submit their bids. This is to increase their competitiveness and increase the chances of winning contracts. Right. As you know, we used to have a big event annually in Manila, which was called the Business Opportunities Fair. And that was a good kind of venue for all of us to have a direct interaction with the business community and for business community to understand ADB's operation and establish good network. But unfortunately, due to COVID-related restrictions, we cannot organize these in-person events anymore, and we will basically do everything in a virtual format. So last year we have conducted 34 business opportunity seminars in different locations, and we hope that the same number we will achieve during this year. At today's event, at your request, we will focus on operations covering transport and energy, which are traditionally the largest in ADB portfolio. And these sectors, also projects in these sectors, were very seriously affected by the pandemic because due to travel restrictions, many contractors and consultants could not work in the field and many large contracts were put on hold. However, this year we see some signs of improvements, and we see that many countries allowing contractors and consultants to enter countries and to resume work, but subject to compliance with the required health and safety protocols. And these are different in different countries. And at the same time, also, we resume processing of new projects, for the time being remotely, but as was already shared before, I think by Phil Rose, we are looking forward to actual field missions and to have more closer kind of dialogue with the borrowers, but also with the consultants and contractors who are working in the field. So life goes on, and we will try to continue our collaboration with the business communities around the world. And we value that cooperation because, in the preparation and administration of ADB finance projects, we heavily rely on consulting support. So I hope you will find this event useful, and it will help you better understand how ADB operates. And finally, I hope it will help you to win contracts under ADB projects. So I will now stop here and will hand over back to Derek. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rustam, for that presentation and overview. I think it certainly paints a very good picture in terms of the ever-growing opportunities that are coming through in the pipeline and the focus that the ADB continues to have in these big sectors in transport and in energy. And I hope that certainly what we'll hear today will point to that growth and those opportunities that you have spoken about. And so to start us off in terms of the specific sectors, we will start off on transport, which again, globally is an area of growth. And as we all look to the challenges of climate change and net zero and being carbon neutral, there's certainly a lot of work that's been going on, certainly in the UK, in terms of trying to do sort of low carbon vehicles. And again, there's a consciousness of the challenges that various markets have around transport. And so it'll be very interesting to hear from Jamie Leather, who is the Chief of Transport Sector Group at ADB, some of the sort of priorities that the ADB will be having around the transport sector and some of those opportunities that potentially UK companies could pursue. Jamie, looking forward to hearing from you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. Some great words have been said, and I think based on those, it is a very interesting time. We are seeing significantly different types of requests for assistance from our clients, both government and private sector. So we are seeing a shift in the type of work we're providing. And in my presentation, hopefully I'll cover that. I will look at the future emerging areas, but also highlight some of the specifics. I won't go through every single opportunity. Those are available. One of the easiest way to find all sectors is to look on ADB's website and go into the countries, and within there look at the country partnership strategies, CPSs, and the country operational business plans, COBPs, which have a 3-year rolling work in terms of lending and non-lending assistance. But that's the structure of my report. Really, what are the emerging areas? And I think in these areas where British firms could have a competitive advantage in terms of their expertise and knowledge to support our clients. Next slide, please. I wanted to start off just as Phil mentioned, we're moving away from the traditional roads, and I just wanted to highlight 2 things on this slide: the shift within the transport sector at a subsectoral level, but also in terms of the overall lending volumes. Across the top, the pie chart shows the reduction in roads, which is the blue color. In the 1990s, it was 72%, and the current pipeline, it's down to about 51%. So we've seen a steady shrinking of the traditional road projects. They've not gone all together, but we are shifting in the type of support we're providing in the road subsector, and I'll get into some of those as well. You'll also see that the volume in terms of the lending has increased decade by decade. It seems to have gone up almost double. So in the 1990s, it was around 880 million, up to 2 billion per year in the 2000s, just over 4 billion per year in the 2010s, and we're looking at an increase again of around 5 billion. And across the bottom, that is reflecting that growth in terms of lending volume. And as was mentioned, a significant dip in 2020 due to the complexities of trying to operate without being able to go out on site. So at the moment, as was said, it was always between energy and transport, which was the largest sector, but clearly there is still huge requirements for support in both of these areas, and I believe that transport is slightly ahead. There's no competition between the 2 sectors. We respond to the client's needs, but we are seeing these kinds of shifts. I would also add that obviously we cover a range of different economies across Asia and the Pacific, and a differentiated approach is taken across those countries. Some are still requiring basic infrastructure, so we'd be looking at some of the more traditional. Some of the middle income countries are looking at very different kind of support, a lot of institutional, a lot of knowledge and value addition support. Next slide, please. Driving a lot of this is Adb Strategy 2030. Now, transport is not, we've taken a much more thematic approach to this, and transport as an enabler of development still underpins a lot of the work we provide. Obviously, it provides access to jobs, education, social services, and health facilities as well. So that poverty reduction, economic growth is within there. There's a geographical focus, regional connectivity. Transport plays a significant part within the region. A huge interest in livable cities, particularly urban transport. If you have traveled around much of Asia, you will realize that one of the concerns we're facing in almost all countries is severe congestion within those cities, leading to very poor air quality, huge economic losses, and also road safety issues related to that as well. But we're not ignoring the rural dimension, rural connectivity, following some of the sustainable development goals, such as 2 kilometers connectivity to all weather roads. So transport is underpinning those. And across the bottom here, more of the corporate targets on climate change, governance, and gender. And again, we're focusing very much within those. We're working closely with the British government on climate compatible growth to look at how the transport energy nexus, this is more knowledge work than infrastructure lending work, but really looking at how the sector within Asia can decarbonize. And governance, many of the areas are also looking at road asset management, road safety issues, institutional reform of their rail subsector, port operations. So there's a huge increase in support being provided within the institutions and the governance more generally. Next slide, please. I'd like to quickly go through each of our 5 regional departments and just highlight the sorts of activities and support we're providing. In our Central and West Asia region, a lot of the work is focusing on regional connectivity. We have a regional cooperation program, and transport plays a significant part within that. more looking beyond just pure infrastructure, but looking at the economic growth and the economic corridors. So it's looking at the transport links, the cross-border points, the logistic services, but also what's happening within the cities and the towns along those roads as well. So it's looking at the development impact of the infrastructure. Within this region, we're also looking at a number of rehab projects on road and rail, and a lot of road asset management and road safety work is being done here as well. There are some urban transport, usually metro expansions, extensions to existing lines, and equipment and institutional reform as well. Next slide, please. In South Asia, one of our largest regions for transport, a huge interest in India, particularly in terms of mass transit, rail-based as well as bus-based transport systems. And this is across India, we have a number, but also in Pakistan and Bangladesh. The type of assistance, this was mentioned, we do cover a whole range from project preparation, planning, design. We have some policy support within here as well, but also looking at the detailed design, the civil works, and particularly as we're looking on the rail side, E&M, rolling stock provisions as well. The other bullet point here on an environment and social protection, all the support we provide has very stringent safeguards policies on environmental issues and resettlement issues, social protection, and all of our projects would adhere to those. Even the project preparation or a policy advice, we would look at those safeguards components within that. Heavy rail or intercity rail, a number of projects, again, SASEC is looking at that regional connectivity, a shift from pure road-based regional connectivity to enhancing the rail connectivity and linking Bangladesh to other countries around the region as well. And here looking at, again, the engineering side, but also the capacity development of the rail bodies, technical assistance to improve that, and enhancing ongoing system operations as well as the civil works and rolling stock improvements. Next slide, please. In Southeast Asia, it's quite a mixed bag, and a lot of this depends on the type of requests we receive from governments, which in turn is related to their level of development and income. So the higher income countries, Thailand, Indonesia, are primarily looking for advisory type support. For example, in Thailand, looking at the rail connectivity they're proposing between the various airports that are being developed and considered, the longer haul high-speed rail options as well. So very much on the advisory type of work in Thailand and Indonesia. Probably our largest country, certainly from a transport perspective in terms of advice, is in the Philippines. I classify them as mega projects, close to $2 billion on commuter rail projects, both to the north and south of Manila, but also a whole range of other components. And one other project I'd like to highlight, which has been going for a few years now, but it just demonstrates the different type of support we're being asked to provide to our clients. And this one was in the Philippines. There was another one in Indonesia, but it highlights that advisory type support. And these were quite large loans. In the Philippines, it was called the Infrastructure Preparation and Innovation Facility. And it's actually been two loans. The first one was for 100 million and the second for 200 million, with matching funding from the government as well. But this was pure consulting services to help the government with their build program. So, and the UK companies were very successful in those bidding. So there is the consultancy work goes far beyond just project preparation. We're seeing significantly and very significant and large consulting services supporting government entities in the transport sector, in the water sector, looking at that capacity, the planning, the programming components, as well as the projects as well. In the lower income countries, Cambodia and Laos, we're still looking at some of the more traditional type of work on roads and railway. Next slide, please. In East Asia, just two countries within the People's Republic of China, it's very much looking at innovation and support around those, looking at inclusive growth, looking at a lot of urban areas in terms of air quality and public transport improvements. And in Mongolia, still looking at the regional connectivity, but also some urban transport within the capital, Ulaanbaatar. Next slide, please. In the Pacific, quite different from the other regions. Obviously, the demands and the requirements in the regions, we do still have a fair number of road subsector in PNG, for example, but a lot more work in the ports and the aviation. These are the critical lifelines and access to the rest of the world for these countries. So there is a slightly different focus in terms of the transport subsectors that we're looking at in many of the Pacific countries. Next slide, please. So the key messages and the type of, as I said, really focusing on what are the government's requests for assistance. Roads are still important, but we're moving well away from the traditional roads, more to the asset management and the upkeep and the programs associated with that, and a significant attention being given to road safety. On the rail subsector, many of the governments are shifting their priorities out of roads and into rail, and we're supporting them with the development of that, both in terms of the civil works, but national planning systems, institutional reform, and enhancement of the operational efficiencies. And as was said by Phil, a real focus on the urban transport systems, particularly mass transit systems, be they bus, rail-based, and non-motorized transport as well. So the changing demands, we seem to be shifting away, or having said there always is a differentiated approach, but we're shifting away from pure infrastructure. We're looking at system management and efficiency gains. And I think that's what our clients are increasingly seeking from ADB. It's this value addition. And that's why I was trying to focus on some of these areas, because I believe those are where the British consultancy firms would have a competitive advantage in being able to bring in their experience, not just from the UK, but from their work around the world and in the region as well. There is a big push on technologies and use of that. We're looking at data to make better informed decisions. For example, in road asset management, which priority, which road network should be attended to first, and has that work been done? It gives us a greater opportunity to do that governance component on road works being undertaken and carried out. We are doing a lot of work, and again, we're working with the British government on this, on emerging technologies such as e-vehicles. I really do believe that Asia is and will lead in this regard, particularly if we take in all vehicle types. There's close to 500 million 2- and 3-wheelers, electric 2- and 3-wheelers in the region, which dwarfs the 4-5 million 4-wheeler e-vehicles. So the e-vehicle future or current is really within the 2- and 3-wheelers, and those is the main mode of transport in many Asian countries. So that transition is happening, and happening very rapidly, much within that particular type of vehicles within Asia. I haven't mentioned much about the private sector, but it is a focus of ADB. We're looking to reach this up to 30% of our total portfolio. There are some, we helped our private sector was looking at support in Bangkok for expansion of the metro lines. We've done a lot of rail finances for the heavy rail within India, and we're also helping on some e-vehicle projects within the private sector in Indonesia. So we do have some growing interest in the private sector as well. The final point is looking at broader financial services. We were quite a traditional subsector, looking at project support. We are, if we're transitioning more into this governance issue, into the value addition, we'll make increasing use of our results-based lending and policy-based lending tools in addition to the infrastructure, the project lending. And that's what is meant by greater use of the financial services, shifting our support from pure projects to projects plus a lot more policy and advisory work as well. Thank you very much for your attention. I think that is my last slide. Next slide. Thank you very much for your attention.
Jamie, thank you very much for that. That was really great overview in terms of what's happening in that region on transport, and it's also very interesting to note again, I think, the changes and the transitioning from, as you say, sort of your traditional sort of transport infrastructure per se as the only sort of focus to more system management and looking at other areas. And I think also of interest, I think, when you talk about here, when we think about the emerging tech around transport, we think about e-vehicles, you were talking about the 4-wheelers and mostly and sort of public transport, and yet, as you say, for parts of Asia, the 2- and 3-wheelers are areas where that's where their focus is, because that's the most common mode of transport that there is available there. So again, I think as we look at what UK capabilities are and what we can export, we also need to be looking at how we meet the needs of those markets that that we are going into. And certainly, I think the soft side of transport as well, I think, is, as you say, is also a growing area where sort of consultancy and advisory services are required. And again, I think it speaks well to some of those capabilities that the UK has, and also great to hear the increasing focus from the ADB in terms of private sector work increasing to 30%. But all that, I mean, certainly paints, a picture of growing needs, but also challenges around transport as obviously quite a lot of the countries move along their sort of economic growth. I hope we will be able to, once we get into the Q&A, to touch on some of those subjects that you've mentioned, and we'll be able to get, so that I know there's a couple of questions that have come through. We'll be able to get some clarity on that. But Jamie, again, thanks very much for that presentation. And I'm going to move on to the next one, which is going to be the energy sector. And I'm looking forward to hearing from Stephen Peters, who is the Senior Energy Specialist in the Sector Advisory Service Cluster of the Energy Sector Group at the ADB. Stephen, over to you.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you to the UK Department of International Trade, British Expertise International, the UK-ASEAN Business Council, and of course the UK Embassy in the Philippines. I'll be presenting just a very quick overview of what we're doing in the energy sector. And please go to the next slide. So the objectives of the energy sector is to meet some of these, global demands, which is, universal energy access, which is SDG 7, complying to Paris commitments, and also working on Adb Strategy 2030 and complying to that and help building that. And how we're going to do that, we'll see in orange, which is increased deployment of renewable energy and energy efficiency, which Adb hasn't done much on energy efficiency. It's done some, it's done a lot on renewable energy. Integration of advanced technologies, innovative business models and financing and instruments, and that's specifically the space I operate in. And that's looking at cross-sectoral activities, for instance, urban, energy, environment, and combining all of those activities. So taking Adb out of the traditional roads, bridges and dams, which perhaps people are more familiar with the activities, which is not really what we do anymore. And then creating enabling regulatory frameworks for effective market and sector development, which is basically helping governments to formulate policy. And I wanted to make a point which Jamie said. ADB's work is based on the demands of or needs of our clients, and we engage with our clients by doing preliminary research and sharing experience and sharing information from other countries, and then develop loan packages. The space that I work in is actually in the space where we do the preliminary research, which is the Department of Sustainable Development and Climate Change. So you'll see the lending operations, which I'll talk about in a minute, but the knowledge-based university / think tank space is where we're operating from. So you'll hear a difference in the role. Next slide, thanks. So we talked about Strategy 2030, which we have these operational priorities, OPs, which is our way of sort of getting everybody defined into an order of battle and how we're going to approach these challenges and provide some development outcomes. And so you'll see against the various OPs particular activity. For instance, I'll use OP4, which is making cities more livable. Well, in that space, we're going to support smart energy efficiency, smart buildings, electric vehicles, and again, collaborating with transport because they need charging stations and they need to be able to get energy to the charging stations. Microgrids, waste to energy, which is an area I'm an expert in, and then demand side energy efficiency. So looking at things, and one of the studies we recently did was an energy efficiency park, a study on energy efficiency in an industrial park in the Philippines where they wanted to get some industrial symbiosis. So they're the sorts of types of projects we're working on. I won't go into each of the OPs, but you can see some of the activities. The underlying theme is that we're doing a lot more cross-sectoral complex work. Next slide, thanks. So ADB's lending in the last decade has been about 22% of the bank's lending, typically, and it's been about half and half between transmission and distribution, which is traditional business, and clean energy. And what we've found very interestingly is that our share of clean energy is dropping because countries don't need us to lend on wind and solar and anymore, because they can do it themselves. But if you look at the climate mitigation end of it, renewable energy, we're still doing a bit. We think we can do a lot more on energy efficiency, and we think we can do a hell of a lot more on fuel switching and cleaner fuel. We can do a great deal more there. So the focus of our lending is changing, and we're just at that inflection point now. Next slide, please. So this is a look at the lending, energy lending over the years, and you'll see that energy sector lending has stayed pretty much around about $4 billion a year, and clean energy investments took a dip in 2017, 18, 19, and that was the period where, you know, we weren't funding solar projects because governments weren't asking us to, and private sector wasn't asking us to. So next slide, please. So this is Jamie talked about the regions before. We actually have 5. There's Central West Asia, East Asia, which is PRC and Mongolia, the Pacific, which is basically all of the Pacific plus Timor-Leste, South Asia, then Southeast Asia. So that lending represents about 66, 67% of the general lending for the bank. So you'll see that we're spread across all of the divisions. We're pretty heavily involved in lending in South Asia and Southeast Asia. And Central West has a very different lending profile to perhaps Southeast Asia. So there is a bit of complexity, and that's how we break it down. We also are breaking it down in terms of, you know, what type of finance we're providing and how we're providing it. You'll see the next part, which is the private sector. And I'll give you an example of something that we funded in private sector. We funded a number of waste to energy projects in Vietnam and in the PRC, and those projects were funded by us taking a position and providing some debt to enterprises in China under the private sector side. So you'll see again that total number down the bottom right-hand corner of about $4 billion. So next slide. This is very, very important to us. Energy access is really at the core of what we're trying to do. We're trying to get people to have energy, and you'll see that we've had a pretty good run at getting access to, especially in 2020, we had some very good outcomes. About 10 million people, 10 million households got access to energy. And we've spent a significant amount of money in that activity. And, you know, there's still work to do, but we think that using different business models may now be, instead of doing additional transmission and distribution, we may look at additional microgrid models or fuel switching or alternative sources of energy to provide a lower cost, more efficiency, and higher access to energy for these folks. So next slide. Climate impacts. So 2020, we basically reduced, we have an estimated reduction of 6.9 million tons of CO2 equivalents. And we think that we have an access of about 34 gigawatts of additional RE capacity. And there's some of the numbers that you'll see in reports that you'll get on the website. At the end of this presentation, I will actually post you a link to the website and the search function and an example of one of the projects we're going to talk about. Next slide, please. So that's the lending side. Let's talk about the knowledge side, which is how we engage with our customers in the DMCs and how we formulate what the customers are going to lend money on. We do this through a couple of ways. We do handbooks, case studies, and guide notes. And I'll put a link to a handbook that we wrote on waste to energy and another link that we wrote to a handbook on hydrogen, and that might go a little way to answering Moshi Uzaman's question. I really hope I got that name right. But providing some information about how we share information with our DMCs. We also do blogs, technical notes, and engagements, and I'll share another site, which is a data room from another project in the chat, which is how we engage and share information. And then the bit that we've really been missing over the last year or two is the face-to-face contact in forums and workshops. We've been doing it online, but it's just not quite the same. We're still carrying on with it, but we're really looking forward to getting back into the field and being able to see the expressions on people's faces and share the body language of what's going on. And we have our energy every year in June. We have our flagship energy forum, the Asian Clean Energy Forum, which I'm sure many of you have attended. So next slide, please. So we think this year it'll be about $4.2 billion, and it'll probably be about 40% clean energy and 52% transmission and distribution. And we have a long project cycle for sovereign lending, which is lending to governments. So some of these projects have been going for 3 or 4 years before they actually get to a point where they've got lending. So, and again, you can track all of that access on the ADB website if you've got a particular interest in a technology, a capability, a country, a region, or and the status of where the project is. So what we'd like to do is to try and get to $5 billion a year. And we think that we can do that by increasing our energy efficiency and renewable clean energy funding. And some of that is hydrogen, which we'll talk about in a minute. Next slide, please. Here are some of the examples that we have of projects, and I'm not going to go into too much detail on them, but you can see that they're sort of spread across renewable energy, energy efficiency. There's some low carbon technology projects, there's some demand projects, and there's some hydro. Next slide, please. And further, we're going to have activities in solar and wind. We're going to have some energy transition, geothermal. South Taro is basically a solar project. And then we're looking at different types of activities to increase the sort of spread of not just fixating in one area, but a spread across how we can change energy delivery in the region. Next slide, please. So what's the way forward? Well, obviously, we'd like to increase our clean energy developments, and we can do that by either engaging more and sharing more information with our DMCs, and that would be fantastic to share more British expertise and British examples of success in things, for instance, like the Orkneys Surf and Turf project, which was a hydrogen project, which I think is wonderful. Those sorts of activities we can share, and that can inspire governments to ask us to come back and do more work in that space and lend more money in that space. We also want to look at, as I said, more sophisticated delivery models and also more resilient delivery models. So for instance, we're doing a current project which is looking at the use of an app to make collection of waste in a state in India more efficient, but also the data derived from that allows us to say, well, there may be an opportunity for a biogas plant, or there may be an opportunity for a plastics recycling activity there. So that's the level of sophistication we're getting on. And this all goes to being multi-sectoral. So I sit in the energy division, but I spend a lot of my time talking to the urban division, the environment, the climate change group. So the delivery mechanism for financing this decade is going to be very different to what we previously did. So and the UK's innovation, I think, will be very useful for us to help make that transition and communicate the transition to our DMCs. Next slide, please. So we're in the middle of redrafting our energy policy, and it's currently under discussions with our board. But we've got 5 key themes that we're carrying forward on that, which is securing energy for a prosperous, inclusive Asia, basically making sure everybody's got access to energy that they can move forward. Building a sustainable and resilient energy future, which talks about having systems that are going to be low carbon and going to be able to operate in the changing regulatory and energy mix market. Engaging in institutions framing policy reforms. So helping governments make a decision, or helping our DMCs make decisions about what might be an appropriate energy mix, how they can transition from one to another, how they can make better use of natural resources that they already have, and how they can use energy in combination with other activities to make their communities more resilient. Promoting cooperation and enhancing energy security. This is especially important in Central Asia. We've been working on that for a number of years, and that is a very, very important topic. We're doing a lot of that in Southeast Asia as well, but Central West is the point of the spear for that activity. And then cross-sectoral operations to maximize development impact. Development impact is basically helping people get out of poverty. that's effectively what ADB was created for. So the objective we want to try and do is, instead of building these massive facilities to generate the economic activity, we also want to see that we get inclusion. For instance, someone builds a plant, that a piece of infrastructure. Well, is that infrastructure designed so that you can get women involved in operating it or working in it? Is it an inclusive design? Is there space for other people to come in and co-locate in those activities and generate revenues? Those sorts of activities are very, very important. And that will be quite a focus for our activities going forward. So next slide. What I will do now, Ki Yong Nam Dr. Nam is my colleague, and he is the principal energy economist. I'm filling in for him today, but I'm very happy to answer any questions, and I'll share a few links in the chat box after this. So Derek, I'm going to pass back to you. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Stephen, thanks very much for that presentation. And again, I think it points to an evolving ADB and sort of innovation and tech taking place, but also being very conscious of what your goal is in terms of development impact, and ensuring that the work that you're delivering is actually having social value in terms of being inclusive and again targeting that the growth. But again, I think what's interesting for me is that some of the move to clean energy, or sort of looking at transmission and distribution, again, I think continues to be areas where UK companies have got some capabilities and should be doing more in terms of exploring some of those opportunities to see where we could contribute to. And the slides that you've shared obviously will be available for people to look through, and there is a Q&A session there that people have already been putting in questions, and they're grateful for the panelists who have been already responding to some of those. It's great to hear about what you're doing in the energy sector. And I think to tie all this together now, we're going to move on to hear about doing business with the ADB in terms of, with all these opportunities, whether it's in the energy or transport sector, and even broader than that, how do you navigate your way through the procurement processes? What are the requirements, the criteria, and to take us through that and give us some insights in terms of how to navigate your way through the procurement. We've got the procurement specialist for ADB, Luke Forchman. Luke, I hope I pronounced your surname correctly there, but
pretty close.
Thanks,
you, Derek.
And look forward to hearing from you. Over to you.
Okay, thanks, Derek. And good morning, UK colleagues. Again, I'm Luke Forchman, part of the ADB procurement team. So we've just had some really excellent presentations from Jamie and from Peter around transport and energy. I think we've seen some pretty consistent themes around innovation and generally just business growth. And it does feel like those are areas where UK firms could certainly fit into ADB operations. So I will talk about doing business with the ADB. And I will warn you, I do have a lot of slides, and I'll go through them very quickly. And there will be an opportunity for questions at the end. But with that said, please, next slide. That's just the overview. We have here, okay, ADB. I guess maybe if this wasn't said before, I'll just cover it in brief. We are a multilateral public nonprofit institution. We were founded in 1966. We have 68 member states, 49 of which are in the Asia Pacific region, and 41 of those are considered borrowers. So there they are on the map. And you see, in general, ADB does have some form of an office location in every single country that is reflected here, save for the Pacific, where we generally have kind of regional offices. Japan and the US are the two largest shareholders of ADB. And to deliver our different projects, where we fund different governments in the Asia Pacific region, we work with the private sector, such as individuals and companies on this call, NGOs, foundations. We work with academics, and think tanks, and different donors, and others within the international community. ADB's ultimate aim is the eradication of poverty across Asia, and it's our single most important strategic priority. The ADB vision is clear and far-reaching. It's for a prosperous, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable Asia and the Pacific. And frankly, ADB and its borrowers rely upon competent and qualified and capable contractors and consultancy firms to help deliver that overall goal. Next slide. So ADB 2020 Sovereign Portfolio, what is this? So this would be the aggregate value of all ADB funded projects across the region. So it amounts to about $102 billion. So it's clearly very significant. As others have said in different presentations, we group Asia across 5 different regions. And in terms of the overall cumulative value of these projects, it goes from South Asia to Southeast Asia and Central West kind of being neck and neck around 24-25% of the aggregate value, followed by East Asia and then the Pacific. The vast majority of ADB funded business opportunities require companies, be they consulting firms or contractors or individuals, to be from ADB member countries. So that is a general requirement to participate in ADB funded contracts. And we have seen and talked about the sector focus, and we're here in general, it's a transport and energy business forum. And as you can see there, those 2 sectors have traditionally accounted for about 50% of the ADB overall portfolio. So that's clearly significant. I think both of the earlier presenters, Peter and Jamie, have talked about how innovation in green technology will be the major thrust going forward. And the traditional kind of road construction is on its way out to be replaced by things like road and rail going forward. So that's really already happened across the ADB sector portfolio. And even the same can be said with renewable energy as well. At the same time, health is being more and more a larger proportion of ADB's lending. That's notwithstanding just COVID-19, but in general, as the bank moves towards softer sectors to support its borrowers across a growing Asia. Next slide. So this one is really just about, I guess it's really similar information that's reflected in the previous slide. The key message being that ADB's portfolio of projects has exhibited continuous growth over the past 5 years. On average, that's year on year of about 8.6%. So clearly opportunities for businesses to get involved, to be a part of this tremendous growth story. Next slide is really just about our different funding instruments. So it's slightly technical, but loans have always really represented the highest proportion of the funding instruments that are involved in ADB projects. And this is that representation over the past 5 years. Again, with the key message being that there's opportunities to participate in bank-funded projects, and we are going through a period of fairly tremendous growth. So next slide. Okay, so I think the strategy 2030 piece was talked about a bit. So what is it? And it would probably take this entire session to really run through it. So I'll just kind of provide some highlights. So it's the bank's broad vision and strategic response to the evolving needs of Asia and the Pacific. ADB will combine finance, knowledge, and partnerships to sustain efforts to eradicate extreme poverty and expand its vision towards a prosperous, inclusive, and resilient, sustainable region. So a lot said with that. Key approaches to it. You'll see, of course, the point is to address poverty, accelerate progress in gender equality. Many of the projects that you'll learn about once you start looking at ADB projects require certain equality measures in terms of gender. There's typically requirements around climate change and making sure that we do no harm to the environments that we do operate in. So these are important aspects that outline the 7 operational priorities of Strategy 2030, making cities more livable, promoting rural development and food security, and strengthening governance and institutional capacity. So kind of a lot to potentially be said here around Strategy 2030, but rather than spending a lot of time on this, because I think we are a bit off schedule, I'll just ask Veronica to please move to the next slide, which is about our procurement activities by member state. And maybe just to highlight, all of this information is available on ADB's website. So in terms of the awards to the different contractors or consultancy firms, all that information is published. The ADB website is kind of the one-stop shop where you can find out about ADB opportunities, also find out who was awarded contracts. It's where we issue the notices for the different contracting opportunities. So that's all on the ADB website. But here you go with a ranking of procurement by type. And so goods procurement, so supply of equipment and physical goods, works procurement, which we'll define a bit further later on in the presentation, and then consulting services procurement. So I've highlighted here, as I think others have said before, that the UK traditionally does very well when it comes to consulting services. You'll see here it was ranked, what, 4th in 2018. I have other information which shows how it kind of stacks up against other countries over a longer period of time. So we can take a look at that. Next slide. So this next one here is just the top goods suppliers by amount. Again, this is all available on the ADB website. We kind of just want to showcase this just to get this information out in the spirit of transparency. Next slide, which shows the top works contractors by amount from 2017 to 2020. And the next slide has similar information by consultancy firms. So there you go. This is interesting and something that ADB has recently created and published on our website. So it's the Operational Procurement Statistics Dashboard, or ProcDash, as we do like to call it. So anything you want to know about ADB historical procurement transactions in terms of values, in terms of spending across sectors or across regions or even countries, can all be found in ProcDash. So it provides these sort of easy to understand views or dashboard views where you can look at charts or maps which illustrate the spending across whatever kind of functionalities you're interested in assessing. So that's all there on ProcDash. And for those that really want to dive into the detail, you can actually download all of the data into Excel format and do your own number crunching if you so wish. So that's ProcDash, and it's on the ADB website, and the link is even displayed there up on the slide. Okay, next slide. And this chart is actually from ProcDash, and it shows how UK contractors have stacked up over the past 5 years from 2016 to 2020, where we've seen a cumulative spend of approximately 45 billion. UK contractors are about 27th in this, and this is considered all procurement, so goods, works, and consulting services. That amounts to about 39 million per year. The story, I think, gets more interesting on the next slide, where we look at procurement by nationality of consulting services, where the total for the 5-year period is 3.57 billion, and the UK consulting firms rank 5th. So that's, I think, a very compelling story and talks to the value that British expertise and UK firms can bring to bank-funded opportunities, about 38.3 million per year in contracts. So it's certainly a very interesting number. And finally, the third slide here, which is also from ProcDash, just shows how UK contractors, or UK suppliers rather, have stacked up across that same 5-year period on the supply of goods. And we consider, in this case, the origin of goods to be if a UK supplier won a contract and supplied goods, or if a supplier from a different country had a contract and sourced those goods, and that country of origin is from the UK, and supplied those goods to a ADB funded project. So under either condition, that would be provided here. So also a fairly interesting bit of information. Okay, next slide. Why pursue ADB funded contracts? So it's been mentioned before, but the financing is assured for the contract type, meaning ADB provides a loan to a country. The country generally conducts the procurement process, but that funding is secure and that funding is in place. So I think in any case, payment risk is there, but under ADB funded projects, it is certainly lessened to a significant degree compared to more commercially funded opportunities. It is a gateway to new opportunities in fast-growing economies across multiple sectors. Transport and energy, as we're focused on today, being two of the largest, but there's other sectors that ADB is funding as well, including water, urban, health, education, and various others too. Our operations are growing. We've demonstrated that with the different slides that I presented earlier. We have an internationally accepted, fair, and transparent procurement process and procedures. So countries which are borrowers to ADB follow ADB's procurement processes and procedures, which we'll talk about in some detail, all of which again are on our website. We have strong integrity and oversight, and contractors and consultancy firms get very valuable past performance by working under ADB funded projects to support potentially other international financial institutions or multilateral development banks, be it World Bank, EBRD. I think working with ADB is certainly a good gateway to work with others that are similar to us. And you can make a positive contribution to our mission of eradicating poverty across the region. Okay, next slide. Types of opportunities. So supply of goods is, I think, pretty clear. Machinery, equipment, whatever it might be, a physical item. So our borrowers often have supply opportunities for goods. Civil works, we kind of lump construction in general as civil works, so that road, rail, power plants, building schools, wastewater treatment, all of those are considered civil works. Consulting services. So consulting services are a bit different in a way. So the funding for consulting services comes broadly in two different areas. It could be with one of our borrowers through a loan or a grant, or it could be directly working with ADB under what's called technical assistance funding. So with consulting services in general, you could be working with the borrower or with ADB, just depending on the nature of the funding. And then finally, non-consulting services. So that's a definition for a type of service or that can be provided that is either physical or intellectual, but things that are generally routine and easy to measure. Maybe installation services or surveys or auditing, things like that, we consider non-consulting services. So those are the four types of opportunities. And now to the next slide, which is where can the private sector get engaged in ADB projects. In this circular diagram here is our project cycle. And I think the message is that there's opportunity throughout the project cycle, be that at the beginning. One of the gentlemen earlier mentioned the country partnership strategies. So every few years in each country, we work with the government to talk about what sectors and which areas should we focus on for the following few years. And we have opportunities for individuals at that stage to help support the country partnership strategy preparation, which follows after that with concept papers for specific projects and preparation for specific projects. So at either of those stages, there's opportunity for firms or individuals to support in that overall process. Next, as we follow this circular wheel in a clockwise fashion, we go to the approval process, which is really where we present the project to our board of directors. There's really not much to do there in terms of private sector. But after that point is when a lot of the procurement activities commence. So that would be when our borrowers would tender out opportunities for civil works or for project management services during the implementation phase. And then following that would be the evaluation phase, where there also are opportunities for firms or individuals. So I mean, ultimately, the project cycle of ADB is fairly long in terms of timing, but that's due to the fact that the projects themselves are generally quite high value and complex. And the ultimate message is there's opportunity throughout. So next slide. So not to belabor everyone a whole lot with the difference between ADB's previous procurement framework and our current procurement framework, but in 2017, we made a pretty significant change in how ADB treats procurement. So prior to 2017, it was very much a rules-based system, and we went away with that to more of a flexible, fit-for-purpose based system. So the 2017 new procurement framework was birthed out of that process, and every project following the 1st of July 2017 is under the new framework. So the concepts are a bit different, but in either case, there's opportunities for firms and consultants in either framework. And of course, the new projects are all under the 2017 procurement framework. All of this is online. And one of the, I guess, maybe interesting parts about the 2017 procurement framework are there different guidance notes out there that talk about how ADB treats certain aspects of the procurement process, which are specific to the 2017 procurement framework. Next slide. So our procurement principles, these came out of the 2017 procurement framework. They're listed up here. I don't think we need to go through them all. Highlighted are quality and value for money. So it's not to say that before the 2017 procurement framework, we weren't focused on these two new areas. It's just that they became sort of stated results that we were aiming for in all of our projects. So to deliver a project that, of course, has quality and then delivers value for money for our borrowers. Next slide. So where does ADB fit in sovereign procurement? So of course, we are the borrower. You know, we act in a review capacity in support of the developing member country or the borrower that has received a loan or a grant from ADB. We ensure the procurement is carried out as per the agreed procedures and in accordance with our procurement policy. And we do that either on a post-review basis where we review a transaction after it's been conducted, we sample and review, or we do it under a prior review basis where any new kind of transaction would come to ADB to review before it's conducted. So our executing agency is typically the Ministry of Finance in general. They're the ones that sign the loan or the grant with ADB. And then they will have an implementing agency, which is typically a different ministry within the government that will issue the tenders and perform the evaluations. And then ADB will liaise predominantly with the implementing agency on the specifics of the project. So next slide. A bit more of the same here. I just want to kind of highlight that in any case, you know, however the structure works, open competitive bidding is the preferred option and our default option for ADB funded opportunities. What I mean by that is that any qualified consultant or contractor that is from an ADB member country that is capable to perform the work can participate in the procurement. So that is our default. We are very much proponents of fair and open competition, and it's kind of at the forefront of our procurement policy and what generally is conducted across the different borrower opportunities of ADB. Next slide. So there's lots of procurement documents which are all online. There's a different suite of procurement related documents depending on the type of procurement we're conducting. So there's a different suite of documents for procurement of goods or procurement of works. For example, procurement of works, we have our own suite of ADB documents, but the terms and conditions generally follow FIDIC, which I think many of our construction contractor colleagues on this call will be pretty familiar with. So we follow FIDIC for many of our works opportunities. I think maybe just to highlight that the general format of our bidding documents, these procurement documents that are listed here are consistent and they're on the ADB website, but will generally follow a FIDIC kind of format for the specific terms and conditions of the actual contract. Next slide. So talked about the different ADB procurement methods. Again, open competitive bidding is our preferred and our default, but it doesn't always take place due to specific circumstances or constraints within the market. So in some cases, there just isn't enough qualified bidders, or the procurement would warrant a limited competitive bidding situation where it'd be more bid by invitation only. But in general, open competitive bidding is our default. For each opportunity, the method will be clearly mentioned on the ADB website, which outlines the project, includes the terms of reference, and includes other details necessary to put together a substantially responsive bid. Next slide. So, common mistakes in preparing bids, and if you read through these, a lot of them kind of fall into the category of administrative error. Bids not being signed by the right person or no authorized signatory being identified. We typically require documents which substantiate the structure of the bidding entity. So sometimes signatures are missing. Sometimes a firm may forget to provide a bid security or the bid securing declaration, in which case we really can't allow for the evaluation of the bid. These are generally reasons for rejection. So if there's an insufficient amount of the bid security, or there's just no supporting documents provided in the bid, these can be reasons for rejection, and we certainly don't want that. Other reasons are just incomplete bids or partial bids. or conflicts of interest not being disclosed. So these are just some common mistakes, and we certainly would probably just highlight that it's important to make sure that your bid is all-inclusive. It contains everything that's being asked for in the relevant section of the bidding documents. It's a shame to have to reject a bid that's missing something. If it's based not really on the content of the bid, just based upon a administrative oversight, we certainly don't want that to happen. So just kind of highlighting some common mistakes in preparing bids. Next slide, which just talk about our anti-corruption and policy guidelines here. We have an integrity principles and guidelines, and this is on the website, which contains the highest ethical standards, which ADB staff, consultants, suppliers, our borrowers, everyone that's involved in supporting an ADB funded opportunity is required to follow. Same can be said with our anti-corruption policy and guidance. So all that's on the website. Point being is that ADB funded opportunities provide the highest degree of ethical standards for everyone involved in that activity. Next slide. So about consulting services, I think maybe a lot of people on the call are in this space. So next slide, consulting services, we have consulting firms and individuals, and those sort of entities can be funded through what I said earlier was this technical assistance, which would be an opportunity directly between ADB and the firm or the individual, or loans and grants. And loans and grants would be with one of our borrowers and the consultant or the consultancy firm. So recruitment can be done nationally or internationally. So for example, in general, we require international consultants for a particular project that will be outlined in the terms of reference. And if we require national consultants equally, that will be outlined in the terms of reference. The determination of which kind of type or specialization is required is really based upon the exact details of the project or the procurement, but it will be clearly outlined. And in general, this ADB member country policy does apply. The only caveat to it would be for consultancy firms under our new procurement framework. Consultants from any nationality can apply as long as they are part of a firm that is from an ADB member country. So that's kind of one caveat around it. A firm is considered a national if they are legally incorporated in the borrowing country. And of course, an individual is a national if they are from or a citizen of the borrowing country. So that's on technical assistance, loans and grants. But we also have opportunities for staff consultants, and that's under an even different pool of funding, which would be our staffing budget. In many cases, we require individuals to augment our current workforce where we don't want to bring someone on full time, but it just makes more sense to hire a short-term consultant. So we do that as well. Again, all this is published on our website. Next slide. So the next slide is about firm recruitment, so consultancy firms. And so how does that work? So we will have a detailed terms of reference along with the budget published on our CMS system, which I'll talk about. That's Consultant Management Service. That advertisement will be posted, and we will express interest to the advertisement. So there'll be an EOI, which will require firms to express their interest and typically supply some documents that sort of substantiate who they are and their capability to undertake the work. After we get responses to the EOI, the shortlisting process will happen, where we go from a long list to a short list, and then each company on that short list will receive a request for proposal from ADB. The proposals will be submitted and evaluated within the stipulated time. Negotiations will commence, and then contracting and implementation will happen. So I guess that's a very simplified view of the procurement process or the recruitment process for firms under ADB finance projects. The next slide talks about the different methods. So I would say what we see the most of is the first one listed, excuse me, which is QCBS, quality and cost-based selection. So this will be a blend in the evaluation between the cost for the consultancy services and the quality rated by the evaluator of the consultancy firm's proposal. So typically it's 90% quality, 10% cost, 80% quality, 20% cost. At any rate, the ratio will be published in the terms of reference. So that'll be available to bidders when they decide to participate in these different opportunities. The next ones down the line are quality-based selection, which is really, it's based entirely upon the rated quality of the consultancy firm's proposal, followed by qualification selection, which are based upon qualifications, and then kind of down the line to direct contracting. We don't do a whole lot of direct contracting because we certainly do prefer to allow firms to bid. We want to encourage competition and get the best and the brightest and the most innovative to support our different funded projects. Next slide. So general points to approach ADB consulting contracts: identify suitable entry points and look to build expertise. So I think it's important to be strategic in what you do go after with ADB. There's a lot of different opportunities that will be available. It's good to kind of focus in on the ones that are best suited for your own capability in your own background. You can consider the individual consulting opportunities. There are lots of those that get published. It's important to know your client and their expectations, be that if it's ADB funded, the client would be ADB, or if it's the DMC or the borrower, to know what their expectations are and their needs. So something about knowing your client. I don't think that's new for any sphere of business. To understand the context and the background to the project. As shared earlier, we do have a lot of this information on our website in the country partnership strategy, the CPS, and also the COBP, which is the country operations business plan. So that's all out there on a country basis, so you can gain knowledge there. And it's always good to see that sort of knowledge demonstrated in the proposals that are submitted for the different opportunities. Rustam mentioned before as well, identify partners that will add value. We certainly encourage when it makes sense to have a joint venture or a partnership come in and bid on different opportunities. So that could be an area where UK firms could work with firms in developing member countries to kind of bring the best of both worlds to an opportunity. So that's certainly encouraged. And you can also, of course, also consider external specialists that will strengthen your team. And you have to understand the cost of doing business in a new country. That goes without saying. And that's not unique to ADB funded opportunities, but it's certainly important to highlight here. And also ask questions in case of any doubt through this forum here that we're having today, or just in general through the bidding process. And I'll provide my contact details at the end, and you can reach out if you have any specific questions about the procurement process to myself. Finally, the debriefing and complaints. So unsuccessful bidders, if they would like to receive a debriefing about the procurement, they can request so from ADB or from the executing agency. And if they're not satisfied with the explanation, they're also able to submit a complaint. We have a complaints tracking system called PCTS that can be used for that opportunity, for the complaints part. But in general, we think debriefings are a great way to sort of improve bid strategy and ultimately improve future bids. So certainly I think it's great for companies to take advantage of debriefings. And then there's this complaints management system as well for bidders that may feel that things did not go in accordance with the procurement process as it should have. And those complaints can be filed here in the links provided. Next slide. How to find out more information. Go to our website, adb.org/business. We've circled quite helpfully the business center, operational procurement, the project and tenders page, and also how to work with us. Next slide. So yeah, working with ADB, it's all here in the business center. And the good thing about our website, it's very intuitive. I don't think me walking through it here in a PowerPoint would be the best way to do it. We just encourage you to get to the ADB webpage and have your own look at it and navigate through. Next slide. This is operational procurement, where you can find the procurement plans, which will provide a breakdown of all the procurement that ADB anticipates for a particular project. You can look here which contractors were awarded or which consultants were awarded particular opportunities. You can find out about the bidding procedures if you really want to do the deep dive into how an evaluation is done. All that stuff's available here on our operational procurement page. Next slide. So same page or same sort of entry point into the ADB website. You can search by specific procurement notice. That's the tender page. That's all outlined here. You can sort by country, by sector, by funding type. It's really like however you want to look at it. I think you could find a way to do so on this page. Next slide. Consultants, for those that have not, do register in CMS. So cms.adb.org. This is our registration site for consultants. That's firms or individuals that wish to bid on ADB funded projects. That can all happen here. Similar to the earlier pages, they're very intuitive, and CMS is very unique in a way in that we have actually a team that's focused on helping individuals that are having a hard time with the system. So we have cms.help@adb.org. I think that's provided somewhere in the presentation. So that team can be contacted even if it is not intuitive enough to go through the site. Next slide. Consulting services, those are published through CSRNs, so consulting services recruitment notices, and you can find out everything about them once you get yourself registered in CMS, and just by clicking on the view CSRN. So it'll tell you about the funding source, the expected budget, the terms of reference, the different key dates that you have to submit information. All that's available through the CSRNs, which are constantly being posted on the ADB site. And if I didn't mention it before, every opportunity funded by ADB is published by the borrower on their own site or in local newspapers and across the borrower's country, and also on ADB's website. So I would suggest to stick to the ADB website for the one-stop view of kind of what's going on across bank-funded opportunities. Next slide. Okay, we don't expect you to go to our website every day, so we do have our location where you can register for alerts. So that's here. So you can just kind of indicate what you're interested in, and you'll be able to turn on and off specific alerts and have those come through email in a frequency which suits you the best. So last and not least, COVID-19 opportunities. ADB has done a lot really in response to COVID-19, be that on the policy-based lending scheme or just by procuring PPEs early on in the initial phases of COVID and supplying them to our borrowers. Much of that activity on the direct procurement has slowed down, but you still are able to search for current and upcoming procurement by a COVID-19 filter, and we can demonstrate that here on the next slide. Yeah, so filter by COVID if you'd like to, because there still are opportunities out there. And with that, I appreciate everyone's time. I'm going to turn it over to Derek for the next phase of today's session. Thank you.
Luke, thank you very much, and quite a run through. I think this part of the presentation is one of those that I think has a lot of interest in terms of people who want to get into some of the details in terms of specifics, and I appreciate that. Probably, sort of the time you have is not sufficient to go into specific details. But the great thing about I think the ADB is you have the teams that can sort of answer some of those questions, and I see it's great to see that some people have already been answering questions, and part of my team have been the panelists have been answering those questions. So really great to have had that opportunity to talk to you. And Veronica, as we go into the Q&A, would it be possible for us to get maybe all the presenters back with their videos on, and just as we prepare for a Q&A session, and then at least I'll be able to point out to some of those. It's been, I think, obviously a marathon of a presentation, and it's been fantastic to hear about everything that's going on at ADB. And this is only just as part of the ADB around transport and energy. So there's so much going on that, time to go through the details we just don't have. But just to start off in terms of that Q&A, one of the things I wanted to ask, and I wonder if is Rustam, whether you or one of the other teams will be able to answer this question. When it comes to sort of project concepts where a potential consultant has an idea based on your priorities in a region or a market and things like that, is that possible, where obviously a concept can actually come to ADB to say, look, based on some of these areas, we realize that you're focusing on this area in Indonesia, for example, is that a potential project? Is that something that consultants or companies could do? Rustam, I'm going to start with you. Are you able to answer that?
Yeah. Let me try to answer that, and maybe other colleagues can supplement. The way how ADB operates is that I think there was a mention about the country partnership strategy and business plans. So the first step is when we receive requests from governments to process particular project in a particular sector. It won't have any details, but we would know tentative timelines when the government wants to borrow that money, when the project is likely to be kind of approved, and when the implementation starts. This is very important because we are helping our borrowers to implement their national agenda. So all projects are really linked to their development programs or roadmaps. For big projects, we have a sectoral roadmaps. So when we receive these requests and we include in our operational pipeline, the next step is then to discuss about project preparation. So there will be details. And at that time, we either hire individual consultants for preliminary kind of assessment, or if it is relatively straightforward, then we hire a firm to do different analysis, feasibility studies, and then prepare a proposal. Because what we will ultimately approve as ADB will be one of the many options which were considered during project preparation. So this is how it works. Of course, for firms or individual consultants who have certain ideas which they want to share with ADB, I would suggest to look at the pipeline, this country operational business plans, because there will be a list of projects that have not been processed. So they're still kind of at the very early stages. For each project, there will be a project officer's name on ADB website. So this is when our partners who are on the call today can share their ideas. Not necessarily that would be accepted, but at least it provides a kind of avenue to discuss.
Excellent. Right. No, that really, that certainly answers the question. And I think the key there is that the driver of some of these programs is obviously the your borrowers, the countries, your partners, that actually based on their priorities, strategic priorities, and then obviously following your assessments, those opportunities can be evaluated, and then the decisions are made whether to go ahead or not. This is also an opportunity for those of you, I hope most of you who have been posting questions, most of those have been answered online, and you should have seen those. But if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand, and we'll be happy to call on you to ask your question live. At the moment, I've got Joe McLean, who would like to ask a question. Joe, I'm not too sure whether you're able to unmute yourself to ask your question. Joe, Joe's okay. There you go, Joe. We can see you. Thanks very much.
Hi, good morning, guys. Thank you very much for that presentation. It was thoroughly interesting. I'm actually asking this question. I'm part of the British Expertise International's Climate Change Working Group, and one of the areas that we particularly work in is reviewing green and sustainable infrastructure in the built environment. Included in this thematic area, we kind of look at inner city transport provisions and how cities will need to adapt for the future. So I suppose my question is, kind of as a result of climate change, what are the key changes that you're expecting to see to Asian inner city transport, what you expect to see in the future, and where the opportunities will be for organizations to provide these solutions? Okay, and so again, I think I'm not sure whether that who is best placed to answer that. I don't know, maybe James. There's
yep, thanks. I had my hand up because I think I dismissed one of the other comments, so I'll try and answer that at the end as well. I think it's imperative that we do shift in the way we're looking at urban transport in Asia, and the models really do require an Asian focused. We can't transfer European or North American. The city size, the city densities are just so different that there is a different requirement. When you're looking at cities of 20+ million, what may happen in one place, a small city in Germany, or a very urban sprawl in terms of vehicle ownership in North America, that those lessons aren't really replicable in Asia. One thing I would say, though, is, and we keep trying to push the governance component, and I think Transport for London is one example that has an institution that has the remit, the power, the finances, the resources, the capacity to really manage urban transport systems in a way that they need to be managed. We tend to be asked, could you please build me a railway, and look at it in splendid isolation. How people get to and from that railway, either in the city centre or at the other end, these are the key issues. And I think that looking at all of the modes, plus parking policy, plus congestion charging, whatever it is, those are what we really need to look at, and that's the future of transport. I'm not looking at one mode over another, but looking at all modes and how they should be done. But given the densities, given the size, it has to be a backbone of high capacity mass transit system, probably rail, with a huge and extensive feeder system of buses and paratransit, 2-3-wheelers, and non-motorized transport, that last mile connectivity that a lot of people talk about, that's also important as well. If I could just try and answer the question, because I think I dismissed it rather than responded to it, and it was on remote sensing. Absolutely. We, particularly during COVID, with the inability to travel, we have been using drones to send images back of inspections of sites. We already were using satellite images to look at routing of transport options from point A to point B. So we are increasingly using a number of remote sensing, be they drones, be they satellite imaging, in the work we're doing. And that was accelerated as a result of COVID. So apologies for pressing the wrong button when I was trying to respond to it, if it disappeared. Thank you.
No, that's great, Jamie. Thanks very much for that. And I think again, a very useful insight. And I think most of you in your presentation, one of the things that you did point out was that, you know, whatever the solutions are, they have to be fit for purpose. They have to be relevant to that geography. And, you know, as UK businesses, again, you can't transplant, you know, specific, you know, just what works in the UK and hope it works over there. But it's really being able to adapt those technology and innovations to suit the markets that you're going into, and understanding what those market needs are. And I mean, again, I think very relevant as we start thinking and businesses start thinking about working in that region. A question I have, I guess, at the moment is going to be for the Department for International Trade. I've got the ambassador here, and I've got Richard as well, the director, talking about, I mean, I was looking at the stats that were coming through, were presented by Luke and others, where UK currently is 26th in terms of the sort of the work, doing work for the ADB. What more do you feel we could do to actually increase that? Because there's obviously a reason why UK companies are not doing more. Do you have a strategy in terms of how we're going to work on that? We are obviously doing it now in terms of these events, and I hope that will certainly add to that impetus. But perhaps Richard, would you like to sort of put in a few comments on that? Richard, I think you're still muted. Okay, I can't hear Richard, and I don't know if Ambassador Laura Boffice has got is able to contribute to that. At the moment, I think both of them are unable to contribute to that. So again, I think it's obviously interesting. What I would like to do is obviously find a way to increase the number of UK participants in the ADB opportunities. And just listening to these two sectors, transport and energy, there's obviously a lot there of UK capabilities that we can bring to bear. And I do hope that there is, you know, we've got a strategy, especially as the UK look to Asia Pacific, to figure out how we can do that more effectively. Now, looking at some of the questions that came through in the Q&A, I know some of these have probably been answered already, but I think for the benefit of those who, probably the wider audience, I'm going to just present some of these questions. And one of the questions that came through from James Toy was around with regards to technology, and his question was: is remote wireless structural monitoring on the radar in Southeast Asia, monitoring of rail tracks, slopes, infrastructure, etc.? Again, I think this is a transport-related type question, and I assume that you'd be happy to take that, Jamie.
Yeah, I think this is the one I deleted. Apologies for that. But yes, we have been using this. I mentioned earlier, we've been looking at remote sensing in Central Asia to look at routes when we were realigning a road due to climate change issues, actually, and so we needed a new alignment. So that has been used, and we're increasingly using drones to monitor and check the current status of roads, as well as work under construction and implementation, accelerated because of the COVID and the lack of ability often to get out on site. One other thing I mentioned on that technology side, there was a mention of mobile phone data, and yes, better travel information. Malaysia, for example, not ADB funded, unfortunately. We would have loved to have been part of that. The Malaysian government has a full origin destination trip pattern by type of vehicle, all based on smartphone data. So if your phone is at that place and it's geared as a residential area, that's your home. During the day, it's in here if that's an office or a factory or a school. That's a work trip or an education trip. And if your phone stops and starts, it's obviously on a bus. So they have some very clever assessment of that phone data to work out where your origin is, where your destination is, what type of trip it is, and also what mode of transport. And that covers the entire peninsular Malaysia, mainland Malaysia. So and one area we did work with on mobile phones was using an app on a smartphone just to get the quality of the road, how rough, the roughness index of the road. We can spend $1 million trying to buy a very sophisticated piece of equipment, which can obviously only go around so many roads within a certain time, or we could get 1 million phones with this app downloaded on sitting in government vehicles, and those can bounce around and report the data almost in real time on what is the quality of road meter by meter. It's not perfect, but I think we found that 1 million data sources is probably more advantageous in terms of looking at road quality and prioritization than $1 million spent on one vehicle that can give a much more accurate data. But we prefer to go the route of getting 1 million results sent in real time to see where we can prioritize. And that obviously then we would go out and do inspections to look at the specifics on whichever section of road was in the worst condition and needed the most attention. So we are embracing technology as much as we can in all of those areas, both sensing, drones, as well as satellite imaging and smartphone technology, whether that's for trips or for assessment of road conditions or travel times as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jamie. I mean, and now sort of looking at you, Stephen. I mean, talk about energy. I mean, it's, you know, if when you look at Asia and some of the challenges they face, very daunting. You know, you talked about, you know, ensuring energy is available to all, and you know, power and transmission, and I guess quite a lot of the DMCs that you work with. I mean, to what extent, you know, how proactive is the ADB being in terms of supporting those governments think through some of those challenges in delivering energy to all, especially when you're looking at clean energy, which in these initial stages could be costly?
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to pull you up on the costly bit.
Oh, good.
This is a popular misconception. In fact, baseline solar is cheaper than something else that's black. So, which I'm not going to talk about, because I'm an Australian and I don't want to talk about it. In terms of how we engage with DMCs, I wanted to make a point. Just a little bit about the work we do in SDCC, because Jamie is the head of transport in SDCC, and I work for the head of energy in SDCC. And part of our job is to sort of see where people should be in 5 and 10 years, not only in terms of looking at what are the projects doing now and how we're going to make sure people don't do something which is a waste of money, but how do we also look at pointing them in the right direction so they can plan for 5 and 10 years away. Use a great example. I can't say which country, but a Ministry of Finance, which is normally our counterparty in a particular country, came to us and said, oh, we have a knowledge product you released last year, which I've just shared, which is the handbook on waste to energy. We've realized we probably may have exposed ourselves to a fiscal concern because we might have to fund these things. What could we do to reduce it? And so we've now got a team of people working on that to advise the government and produce a software program which will allow them to simulate various different things. So for instance, using biogas or using gasification or using pyrolysis or looking at different techniques for right-sizing waste to energy solutions. So as an example, the UK, I think, burns about 65% of its waste, but you have a number of startups which are very, very capable, and we'd love to hear from them. I've had about 300 companies contact me, a number from the UK, and notably the Green Investment Bank and us talk very commonly about technologies and the experience on technologies. So if we engage with government, but we're very open to being people engaging with us. It's really easy to reach out. If you want to share something, send it to the ADB website. You can say, hi, I've got this fantastic technology, send it to the ADB website. It'll end up coming to one of us. If we think it's a good idea, we'll invite you in and say, can you do a brown bag? A brown bag is a half-hour to 40-minute presentation, and the reason it's called a brown bag is in the old days, people used to do it at lunchtime and they bring a bad bag in with their lunch. Jamie, I think, is old enough to remember when it's called brown bag. I'm just sorry, that was very mean, I'm sorry. But in terms of how we get governments to listen, well, they do. ADB has one fantastic thing. It has convening power. So when we talk to governments, we don't tell people what to do. We just say, hey, look, this is great project in the UK where they did this and they saved an enormous amount of money and there was an enormous amount of carbon saving, and we've done a knowledge product and here it is. Do you want to talk to them? And they'll turn around and say, oh, yes, can you ask them to come and talk to us? That's the way you can build a relationship and get domain exposure in ADB. Because if you're just going to tender, then you're up against everybody else. But if you've got something which is really world beating, then build domain exposure within ADB. You'll still have to go through open tender. And there is one thing that you need to be careful of. You cannot tender on work where you've written the terms of reference.
Yeah.
Which is a big problem.
Yeah.
So you need to be very careful about how you engage. But again, just talk to us. We're very keen to get innovation. We're really keen to get this cross-sectoral stuff. And we're very keen to talk to small firms.
Yeah.
Small firms, best way for small firms is to call up and say, hi, I have this expertise. I'm an expert on charging stations, or I'm an expert on the collection of waste or the sorting of waste, or I'm an expert on handling toxic waste, or those sorts of things. We're really keen to hear about that.
Thanks very much, Stephen. I mean, again, and that was a point I was going to make in terms of SMEs. We've run out of time, but SMEs, certainly, if we're to grow the UK numbers that are exploring those opportunities, I think SMEs have got, bespoke expertise that they can bring to the table. And as you've heard, you've got various avenues of entry into learning more about doing work with the ADB. You've got the ADB who you can contact directly. You've got our team, the Department for International Trade, based in Manila and here in London, where you could reach to Chiki and her team, Richard Colley, the director there, and the ambassador, Laura Boffies, who are very keen to continue supporting UK businesses in exploring those opportunities. The UK-ASEAN Business Council has been at the forefront of promoting UK businesses in exploring opportunities in the region. And of course, the British Expertise International. So there is a wide range of opportunity of areas of getting information and exploring some of those opportunities that are available. And again, a huge thank you to all the panelists who've joined me this morning, afternoon, wherever you are, to just talk us through doing business with the Asian Development Bank. And I really look forward to a time when we can do this in person. And as I said, because there is all these different sectors and areas of interest, you will find that we'll certainly be coming out there and trying to do smaller events that are very focused on some of those specific areas. But again, my apologies for keeping you all a few minutes beyond the scheduled time. Again, thank you very much. Do feel free to reach out to any of us if you require additional information, and some of the questions that you might have, if you feel they have not been answered enough, please let us know, and we'll be happy to reach out, follow through, whether it's directly with the ADB or through our embassy and other avenues, but we are here to support UK businesses. And the ADB has got projects to deliver, and private sector engagement is growing. So look forward to engaging with some of you, and to the ambassador, to Luke, Jamie, Stephen, Rustam, and Robin. Thank you very much for your time, and to behind the scenes, to Veronica, Chiki, Ingrid, and the rest of their teams. Thank you very much for all your hard work. Thank you very much. Bye for now.